A man in first class mocked a quiet African passenger, unaware of who sat beside him. What happened at 35,000 feet left the cabin silent and changed his life forever. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré and how true power speaks without a word. The soft hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane prepared for takeoff. Inside the first-class section, passengers were already settled in their seats, sipping champagne and skimming through financial newspapers. It was a quiet luxury. Leather seats, warm towels, polite nods between strangers who all believed they belonged there. Among them sat a man in his early 30s, dressed in a plain navy blue shirt and simple trousers. He didn't wear a watch, no jewelry, no designer tags, just peace on his face and calm in his eyes. His name was Ibrahim Traoré. Most people didn't recognize him, and in this crowd, few cared to look past appearances. The seat next to him remained empty, for now. Then came the noise. A loud, heavy voice echoed from the aisle. "Finally, I paid 10 grand for this seat, and it better be worth every dollar," barked a tall, middle-aged man in a tailored suit. His gold watch flashed under the cabin lights as he dragged his luggage toward the seat next to Traoré. He didn't bother greeting anyone. He was the kind who filled the room with his presence, whether invited or not. The man threw his bag into the overhead bin with a grunt, then sat down, glanced at Traoré, and let out a short laugh. "Didn't expect to see someone like you up here," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. Traoré turned slightly, offering a polite nod. He said nothing. The man smirked. "Let me guess. Airline upgrade, charity seat. You don't exactly look like Wall Street." He chuckled, clearly amused with himself, his voice carrying across the cabin. A woman across the aisle looked up from her tablet, frowned briefly, then looked away. No one said a word. Traoré's silence only made the man more eager to talk. "You from where exactly?" he asked, drawing out the question like a teacher addressing a confused student. "Somewhere hot, I bet. Some places are poor. You speak English?" Again, Traoré responded only with a small smile, his posture steady, eyes returning to the clouds outside. The man leaned back, scoffing. "Right, figures. These airlines, man. First class used to mean something." Someone coughed in the row behind them. A subtle tension began to grow. People noticed, but stayed quiet. No one wanted to get involved. The flight attendant approached with the drink cart, pausing at their row. "Sir, can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone warm and professional. "Yeah, I'll have the scotch," the man said without looking at her, waving his hand. Then he gestured toward Traoré. "And maybe a glass of warm milk for my neighbor here. He looks like he's had a long journey." The attendant hesitated. For a moment, her eyes met Traoré's. There was no anger in them, just patience, and something else, something stronger beneath the surface. She gently nodded, ignoring the man's sarcasm. "Of course, sir," she said, then to Traoré, "And for you?" "Water, please," Traoré replied softly. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like still water just before a storm. The man raised an eyebrow. "Water, naturally." A few rows down, a young man in a suit looked up from his phone. He stared at Traoré, narrowed his eyes, then discreetly began typing something into his browser. The rest of the cabin carried on pretending to read, pretending not to listen. But everyone heard the remarks. Everyone saw it. Loud arrogance beside quiet strength. The plane lifted into the sky. Clouds swallowed the windows, and the seatbelt signs turned off. The man next to Traoré adjusted his tie, still riding the high of his imagined superiority. Traoré continued looking out the window, unbothered, unshaken. But something behind his gaze had changed, something had shifted, and it was only just beginning. The hours in the sky stretched slowly, but the tension in seat 3A and 3B simmered like a kettle ready to whistle. The man, now comfortably reclined and swirling his second glass of scotch, didn't stop. He leaned sideways toward Traoré, as if the silence bothered him more than any insult could ever do. "You know what's funny?" he said, voice slurred just enough to be annoying. "People come to this country, live off the system, and then act like they deserve a seat up here. First class should be for people who earn it." There it was, sharper now, louder. loaded with the kind of venom that doesn't come from ignorance alone, but entitlement. Traoré still didn't react. His hands rested on his lap, steady, his breathing even. The man wasn't done. I bust my ass to afford this. 40 years in finance. Built 3 companies. You probably got here on someone else's dime. Am I right? He looked around, seeking validation from the other passengers. A few glanced up, then quickly looked away. The air grew heavy with discomfort. Traoré replied without turning. You speak as if money excuses cruelty. The man blinked, not angry, confused like someone trying to decode a line too deep for his shallow waters. What? He scoffed. I'm just saying it like it is. A flight attendant, the same one from before, walked by again. This time, she paused. Sir, she said gently, I'd like to remind you to please keep your comments respectful. This is a shared cabin. He waved her off. Relax. We're just having a conversation, aren't we, buddy? He turned to Traoré with a smirk, but the flight attendant didn't leave. She stood there for a second too long, her face calm but firm. Please, sir, she said again, lower this time. The man laughed. Don't worry, sweetheart. If it gets uncomfortable, I'll call the airline. You might not have this job next week. Her eyes flinched. She stepped away, holding back what she wanted to say. She knew men like him, too loud to argue with, too powerful to confront. Across the aisle, the young man who had Googled Traoré earlier finally found what he was looking for. His eyes widened. He stared at his phone. He looked back at Traoré, then at the loud man, then at the other passengers, most of whom were quietly enduring the spectacle, afraid to interrupt what they didn't fully understand. He didn't say a word either, not yet. Traoré shifted slightly. For the first time, he turned to face the man next to him. There was no anger in his eyes, just depth. The kind of depth that made people nervous, not because it threatened violence, but because it exposed shallowness. The man noticed the change. What, you got something to say now? He asked, laughing nervously. Traoré gave the smallest of smiles, then looked out the window again. Outside, the clouds rolled by, silent and endless. Inside, something was building. The passengers didn't know it yet, but they were all about to witness something they'd never forget. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane soared over the Atlantic. Dinner trays had been cleared. Most passengers settled into quiet conversations or pulled their blankets higher, but row 3 remained tense, like a wire pulled too tight. The man shifted again, clearly irritated by Traoré's silence. Maybe it was the calm. Maybe it was how his words had failed to get a reaction. Or maybe, deep down, he knew he had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. He muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Back in the day, people knew their place. There was a pause. Then with a snort and smug grin, he added, all these African leaders, corrupt, useless, wearing suits while their countries starve. Name one who actually did something good for his people. The air shifted. Traoré turned his head, locking eyes with him. But this time, his face wasn't just calm. It was steady, focused, measured. And then he spoke. Have you ever heard of Thomas Sankara? The man squinted. Some African guy? Traoré didn't blink. He gave up his presidential salary, rode a bicycle to meetings, planted millions of trees to stop the desert from swallowing villages, built schools and hospitals from dust. He refused to take bribes. He said, while revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas. And for that, they killed him. The man was quiet now. Traoré continued, I come from the same country, Burkina Faso. I am its president. The silence that followed was deafening, like the pause after a thunderclap. The young man across the aisle sat up straight. The older woman in seat 2C gasped audibly. The flight attendant at the front, who had overheard every word, froze, her eyes darting toward the cockpit, then back at Traoré. The man's face drained of color. His smirk faltered, twisting into disbelief. Wait, what? Ibrahim Traoré, he repeated, President of Burkina Faso. The man leaned back in his seat as if trying to physically distance himself from his own words. His mouth opened, but not a single word escaped. The flight attendant returned, now with a completely different posture. She bent forward slightly, speaking softly. I apologize, Your Excellency. I didn't realize. There's nothing to apologize for, Traoré replied gently. You did more than most. At that moment, something shifted in the cabin. First came the hush, an eerie quiet, as passengers tried to process what they just heard. Then, after a long pause, one person began to clap, then another, and another. Soon, the entire front cabin joined in, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the kind of slow, respectful applause that carries weight. The arrogant man sat frozen, eyes darting around, his world unraveling in real time. He tried to chuckle. Well, I mean, hey, you should have said something earlier, man. I was just joking around, you know? Traoré looked at him, not with anger, but with something far heavier, pity. I didn't stay silent because I couldn't speak, he said quietly. I stayed silent to let you speak, so you could reveal who you are. And with that, Traoré turned back toward the window. The man didn't say another word. For the first time on that flight, maybe in years, he truly had nothing to say. The cabin was quieter now, not just in sound, but in energy. You could feel it, that strange, heavy stillness that happens after a storm. The arrogant man had shrunk into his seat. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders curled inward, his face pale and distant. He stared at the back of the seat ahead of him like it held some kind of answer. But there was none. Traoré hadn't moved. He sipped water, eyes half closed, resting. But the passengers couldn't stop looking at him. One by one, they glanced, whispered, searched their phones for confirmation. And there it was, headlines, photos, stories. Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest leader in Africa, leading a country through one of its most dangerous chapters. Now the weight of who he was settled on everyone's mind. The flight attendant came back, slower this time. She didn't carry the same casual efficiency as before. She placed a warm towel gently beside Traoré and whispered, "It's an honor, sir." Her voice trembled slightly. He simply nodded. "Thank you for your kindness earlier." She blinked, surprised. "I didn't do anything special." "You did what was right. That's always special." The passengers nearby listened. One older man with a worn suit leaned forward. "Sir, I've read about your anti-corruption reforms. What you're doing for education." Traoré smiled. "The people are doing it. I'm just their voice." And that's when something unexpected happened. The screen above showed a quiet documentary playing, a montage of children in Burkina Faso attending makeshift schools under trees, villages getting solar panels, women training in leadership roles, soldiers laying down arms. Traoré didn't ask for it. No one had cued it, but the timing felt like fate. As the documentary played softly, we were taken into flashbacks, not just as images, but as living memories inside Traoré's mind. He saw himself standing in a broken classroom, chalk in hand, surrounded by kids who had no shoes but bright eyes. He remembered standing in the mud during floods, holding a little girl's hand as her family's hut floated away. He remembered the pain of betrayal. Men he trusted caught in corruption, generals plotting coups, foreign powers trying to buy silence. But through it all, he had chosen grace over rage, dignity over ego. And tonight, on this flight, that grace had spoken louder than any title ever could. The arrogant man shifted again. He looked at Traoré, then away, then back. Something in him had cracked. He whispered, barely audible, I've been wrong about people. I thought power looked a certain way." Traoré turned slightly. "It usually does. That's why people miss it when it's real." The man didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. For the rest of the flight, he sat in silence, not out of shame, but out of reflection. He listened, and in a way, that was his first step. One by one, passengers began approaching Traoré. A young woman quietly said, "My father is from Mali. He always told me about men like Sankara. I never thought I'd meet someone like that in real life." Traoré smiled gently. "Then honor him. live what he believed. Another man reached out, shook his hand without words, just a nod, a moment of shared respect. Even the pilot came out briefly, his cap tucked under one arm. "We're honored to have you, sir," he said. Traoré didn't ask for attention. He didn't bask in it. But the lesson had already been delivered, not through anger or revenge, but through example, because sometimes the loudest statement is quiet strength. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle thud. The lights flickered inside the cabin as the announcement echoed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Local time is 6:47 a.m. We thank you for flying with us today." Passengers began stirring, gathering their things, but the mood had shifted permanently. No one rushed, no one pushed. There was a strange calm, like the moment after a powerful storm, quiet, clean, and full of thought. The arrogant man didn't speak as he unbuckled his seatbelt. He glanced once more at Ibrahim Traoré. His eyes didn't carry fear anymore, not even guilt, just realization, like a mirror had been held up to his face for the first time, and he had finally decided to look. As Traoré stood, a hush fell over the first-class cabin again. The pilot appeared near the door, nodding with quiet respect. The flight attendant, this time, opened the curtain herself and motioned for him to go first. But Traoré stopped. He turned to the arrogant man and said calmly, "You go ahead." The man froze. "Sir, no, I can't." "You can," Traoré replied. "And maybe you should, because today you began to change." The man looked down. For a second, it seemed like he might cry. He nodded, stepped forward, and walked out ahead, not with pride, but with a weight on his shoulders that wasn't there before. As Traoré followed, the cabin watched in silence. The rest of the passengers didn't move. No applause, no photos yet. Just quiet respect. But the quiet didn't last. The moment Traoré stepped out of the tunnel and into the terminal, the flash of cameras exploded. Reporters, microphones, shouting voices. "President Traoré! Mr. Traoré, what happened on the flight? Is it true you were insulted and stayed silent?" He didn't stop. He walked calmly, offering only one sentence. "Let dignity speak louder than ego. The world will listen." That clip would go viral within hours, but the real ending happened far away from the airport. A few weeks later, in a small community center in a low-income district, the same arrogant man, now dressed in plain clothes, was seen organizing donated books for refugee children. No cameras, no announcement, just quiet effort. Someone asked him, "Why are you here?" He looked up. There was a pause. Then he simply said, "I sat beside a real leader once. He didn't teach me with speeches. He taught me by letting me see myself." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré returned to the heat, to the dust, to the sound of hammers and protests and hope. No palace waited for him, just the people, and that was enough. He walked through his village again, where kids ran barefoot and women carried baskets on their heads, and nothing had changed, except him, and maybe, quietly, the world. In a world obsessed with status, one man reminded us what real strength looks like: quiet, humble, and unshakable. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes the loudest lesson is taught in silence. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the way we see the world.